Alright, welcome to yet another session of Acid Soul Commentary. The hibernation is over now, so without keeping you in any further wait with formalities, let's get straight to the business. Grinding mentality is a term that I started using for self-identificational purposes in 2013 when I was still going for 200 mining and trying to discover my identity in the high-level skilling community. Its role for me was some sort of a justification and an introduction of a certain playstyle that I had embraced. It mostly was a result of personal realization, but it also was a byproduct of the hype around the efficiency-centric gameplay at the time. Based on personal experiences with a slow skill, I had a desire to moderately criticize the phenomenon, and my point was basically that long-term goals were wiser to approach with a proportionally adjusted level of efficiency and effort, as opposed to full-scale efficiency being the basis of everything since the start. Back in the day, as well as nowadays, I've wanted to underline the importance of mental aspects and consistency, because real-life obligations and limitations are mainly something that we can't just avoid and ignore, at least easily. One of my key ideologies in this respect has been that if you want to decrease the chance of burning out and achieve your goals with real-life obligations alongside, you need to have a more or less serious, routine-related and mental strategy that suits your ideals, capabilities, and mindset. Based on these kind of presumptions and guidelines came up the term grinding mentality, a certain type of basis and a mindset that you can have towards long-term goals. Something that could be with a cognitive effort developed into an acquired taste, a fascination to devote yourself to long-term goals and survive. However, in the course of time and after many even half-delusional hours of introspection and mindless repetition, the term has started to appear more and more ambiguous and relative to me than it used to. In this commentary, I'd like to expand the content of my older video, How is Grinding Mentality Achieved, and tell you what I think about grinding and grinding mentality today. To begin with, my background assumptions and insights regarding what grinding is profoundly about have become more subjective and assumptive. Nowadays, I tend to think a lot more that engaging in repetitive behavior for long periods of time is not something that's profoundly very natural to our minds. I think that we are a species that has a hardwired tendency and affection for patterns and forming routines to our lives, but deliberately exposing yourself to it is just different and unique. And I guess that's where the catch of grinding different activities comes from. It's the challenge of fighting against our natural tendencies, finding new perspectives to things that seem otherwise blank. Thus, I'd speculatively claim that at least when we are grinding RS, our mind is in touch with a more or less consciously recognized mental strategy to deal with the excessively occurring patterns. This can, for example, result in a strong need to multitask, or vice versa, to reflect our attention inside, towards our minds. I've always liked to see the latter one as a relevant aspect in the way I look at grinding mentality. It's an assumed flow state mechanism that has to be awakened by means of self-conditioning. And of course, this is just how I personally like to look at it. If you can relate to me in this sense, please let me know. But it's alright if you're confused right now, because this is just a raw background assumption regarding the supposed deeper nature of grinding, and I will try to give you something more concrete as I move on. So, let's move on. I guess in order to understand the foundations of our motivation to strive for the big grindy goals, it's sometimes useful to give a little thought on the question, how do you even define the term? Personally, I have always liked to understand that grinding has more to it than just what the name suggests. I mean, initially you could justifiably think that the term has a certain negative tone attached to it. Granite was a terrible grind, someone could say. But as peculiar it may sound to someone who is not familiar with the more marginal mindsets to playing RuneScape, I'd say that there's a lot more to the meaning and nature of grinding than meets the eye. So a deep but relevant question is why we grind in the first place and what kind of approach we more or less consciously have towards it. For example, do we grind because we dislike a certain method but adore the goal that lies out there in the horizon? Do we commit to the minimalistic activities simply because we only want to survive from point A to point B in order to ultimately gain the fruits of our labor? Or are we grinding because it is something that we like to see desirable in and of itself? Is it just a strategy that we use for long-term goals, or could grinding be an aspiration itself, as in intrinsically? I think you could justifiably argue that from a certain perspective, grinding is more or less an instrumental strategy. For example, we can see all these 200 mils records and milestones that we really want to get, but in order to reach them, a lot of voluntary sacrifice in many respects is required. No pain, no gain, as they say. So, from this perspective, grinding mentality could be seen as a method of conditioning yourself to a poorly stimulating activity that normally would overload your tolerance for repetition. I guess you could say that this kind of mindset underlines the negative aspects of the term grinding a bit and renders it into more like a mental tool to use for long-term goals. Goals that involve perhaps a bit too much repetition than an individual can handle at first. And initially you could always question why even bother to play if the game seems like a grind to you or a fight against the boredom. But personally I can't relate to that kind of thinking, but I'd say that there's nothing completely wrong with it either. In my opinion, it seems like a natural and most functional mindset. I mean, deliberately exposing yourself to your uncomfort zones may eventually add up greatly to the value of the undergone experience, and obviously the journey itself can be considered your number one source of kicks. Bad days are a natural part of it, but sometimes fighting the boredom could be considered fun. For example, if you share the ordeals with your friends, or if you're simply someone who likes to whip yourself with uncomfortable challenges. I guess I represent one of those personality types myself. For example, when I was still adapting to the slow-paced arty course, I went through very similar thoughts. The low click intensivity was very hard to get used to at first, because after all, I have a mining background, but right now it's like a dreamy coma and I like it. But anyways, the joy of it is in trying to adapt to an uncomfort zone as dedicatedly as possible and eventually acquire the taste. Essentially, I'd say it's based on a positive illusion. You may not enjoy the method per se, but a strong desire for the goal and perhaps a social factor such as possible peer pressure are enough for a reason to learn to tolerate the method, and eventually you might even start to like it. You can improve your tolerance towards the boredom and become more patient in grinding over time, given you approach it with the right attitude and give it enough time. Although it comes with huge individual differences, of course, so at certain point it might be wiser to consider switching to other skills instead of developing an obsession. As for my quarrying adventures, the first 2 weeks that I did post 99 didn't really give me much else than slight emotions of boredom and questions of why am I even doing this, which I eliminated with some multitasking. It got a bit harder in the next 2 months or so, but because I had a realistic mining routine and a big desire to get my first 200 mil, plus some social boost from like-minded people, I just kept on doing it, and eventually I became so numb with the regularity that it didn't even feel like an effort. And once this period of numbness had been around for a while, it just began to vanish, and I started to even get kicks from it. My mind had adjusted to the routines, and sticking to them felt very rewarding. It became like a flow phase where I just flew past the last mining months. It was for sure one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had with any game, to be honest. So I guess if you see grinding as an instrument, hopefully you found this particular anecdote inspirational. But before I get lost from the topic, I guess I should move on. So, is there anyone out there who plays RS just because they enjoy the minimalistic aspect of it? I mean, you could ask whether someone could actually enjoy the repetitive gameplay and consider it to be the primary aspiration in this game. Well, as for myself, I nowadays enjoy the grind a lot because I find it very therapeutic. Being in control of something is very rewarding, and not having to swell with the complex worries of life too much is a pretty neat aspect as well. But To be honest, I play for the goals as well, because I have this weird desire to do things that I find unique, but what other people find crazy and a waste. I know it's a cliche to say this, but fun is subjective, and that's all I can give as a background for this. So, I don't know, I guess enjoying grinding in and of itself is highly individual. It's somewhat divergent and rare to see, but it's possible, I guess. I'm guessing there are personality types out there who might be more prone to embrace this kind of mindset. And I can see that grinding could be nearly hardwired for certain personality types, because in my opinion the aspects of repetitive behavior don't always have to mean ending up fighting the demons of boredom. I mean, there's always a possibility of seeing it all as some sort of a unique form of escapism, trying to more or less temporarily escape obligations of life, or even use it as a moderate form of meditation. I mean, just go and do some articourse, choose a staring point in the middle of the screen, and there you go, it's just subconscious autopilot doing the agility in the corner of your eye for you. At least, that's how creepy it gets for me sometimes. But back to the point, how could somebody who is considered neurologically normal to be able to expose oneself to such abnormal and highly socially unacceptable behavior in the first place, and let alone enjoy doing it? I guess the concept of acquired taste and the deeper nature of grinding that I mentioned at the beginning of this commentary can be adapted here as well. I mean, predictable actions, consistency and routines can be seen as something that really tickles our cognitive capabilities. Yes, we have a demand for diversity and fresh experiences in our lives, but we also like to have stability and familiarity in our lives. Perhaps it's all about utilizing these primal cognitive properties in a counterintuitive or an atypical manner. We might be channeling the potential of our conservative side of mind to reach the virtual achievements that we want. It's really hard to say when there's no proper data to back this up, and I guess in order to justify a conclusive analysis, each of these players who claim to enjoy grinding in and of itself should be interviewed individually, in my opinion. I mean, personally, I wouldn't want to go as far as assuming that dedicated skillers would necessarily have any neurological disorders or abnormalities such as forms of autism or psychotical illnesses. It's of course possible, but without knowing these people personally, I wouldn't go any further than calling them just unique individuals. You can always speculate, of course. But okay, to the conclusive part of this video, grinding mentality today, what is it and how does it appear to me? After my previous videos, I like to see grinding mentality as an abstraction that can be used as a general term for seeing the beauty in grinding and also seeing all the relevant virtues of a good player. Things that I've pointed out on this video or my previous ones, or something else that you value yourself. But in the light of what I value myself, and speaking seriously, grinding mentality is mostly an illusion of seeing something so boring and constrained in a good light, but it's a good kind of illusion. In other words, it's motivational systematics, planning how to stay motivated, dividing energy, and surviving the goal. It's just a fancy term for it. That probably boosts the self-esteem of high-level skilling community, I don't know. And also, I guess I like to look at grinding mentality from two psychological perspectives. It's either a learned thinking model or a more or less hardwired mental adaptation strategy. Or then I'm just delusional. Yeah, you decide. But by consciously thinking that you grind activities because you have a grinding mentality, you can justify yourself all the voluntary sacrifices that you're going to make for a game in order to reach your goals. You're essentially self-conditioning yourself to see everything in relation to your goal. For example, you may organize your week schedule based on your routines, you study at set times, you get certain XP per day, and you allow yourself only a certain amount of breaks. This way, it's an instrumental strategy, and I gotta admit that this perspective is how I justify and even moderately force myself to get 200 mil agility, despite all the things I could be doing in real life. I just enjoy being successful with my strategies a lot, even if the goal wouldn't be directly rewarding, and It's all subjective, of course, and I think it's all about the journey and the things you possibly learn during it. But if I look at grinding mentality from a mental adaptation point of view without going too much jargon, it means all the cognitive features that I subconsciously and consciously utilize to comply with the demands of my goal. For example, at certain days I'm aware that it's going to be a bad day, so I prepare for some serious multitasking that day. Talking about mental preparation and things like that. For example, I'll watch movies or do anything else that doesn't overload me, and if it's a normal day, or I feel that it's going to be a normal day, I'll try to study more. Things like that. Oh, and also I like to meditate with artichokes, like I mentioned earlier. It's almost like a micro-sleeping type of state of mind. If you want to try it, check out a playlist called Abyss Odyssey from my YouTube channel. It's good music for such introspective purposes. Amazing. But yes, back to the point. Grinding mentality is also an acquired taste for me. I mean, after going through so many ordeals, like encountering all those quarry crushers or ones who dissed me for doing what I do, made me appreciate the effort I put in even more, and I started to even like it, as delusional it may sound, and it probably is, but I'm defending my illusions blind to the fact that the insulters are only trying to indirectly get my act together. Things you do when you're young, oh man. But apparently I'm starting to lose the ability to keep this video coherent. Such a video, apparently. And to be honest, even myself, I don't have all the arguments and answers to these questions, so I guess I could leave the missing aspects and rest of the thought stream for the comment section. I think it would be really interesting that way, actually. So, what are your thoughts on grinding mentality? Is it just an instrumental mean to justify yourself you're no-lifing, or have you any other insights or thoughts about grinding as a phenomenon, or critique to what I've said? If I completely missed something, or you've got any other feedback, feel free to comment or send me a private message. But okay, before I end this exceptionally long video, first of all, sorry to keep you in wait for a new video for so long. I do this within my own limitations. But still, it's good to stay subscribed in order to get that positive surprise whenever I rarely decide to upload. I try to give you the best quality as I possibly can. But alright, my humble thanks for listening this far. Keep up the grinding mentality if that's how you roll, and I'll see you hopefully whenever the time is on my side. Acid out from the command center.